Today I will be speaking with award-winning author, director, and screenwriter Nicholas Meyer about his book, The 7% Solution, which I read for my latest book report. Among his many achievements, everyone should know that Nick wrote and directed the greatest Star Trek movie ever, the Star Trek II: The Rise of Khan. Thank you for taking the time today. I loved your book.
Oh, thank you. You can stay.
The 7% Solution is a really cool Sherlock Holmes story. My first experience with Sherlock Holmes is the new movies. Do you remember when you first discovered Sherlock Holmes?
Yes, I do. I discovered Sherlock Holmes when I was about 12 years old, and my dad gave me the complete Sherlock Holmes stories. There are 60. There are 56 short stories and 4 kind of short novels. And I gobbled them all up, and my life was changed because I love them so much. And then I did what a lot of people do is when you run out of Sherlock Holmes stories, you start writing your own.
Do you still have them today?
My early Sherlock Holmes stories? Gosh, I don't know if I have them today. But my dad once said to me, "Oh, if you want to be a writer or be a painter, study other writers, study other painters." And you know, when you study painting, they send you into museums with easels, and you sit in front of a painting and you try to copy it. And that got me interested in not only copying, but also, I guess, forging, which is when you try to make it like somebody else's stuff, and then you sign Rembrandt at the bottom and hope nobody questions it. So, because my Sherlock Holmes stories, in a way, they are forgeries, because I'm pretending to be Dr. Watson, who's pretending to be Arthur Conan Doyle or something. So yeah, I don't know where they are is the answer to your question, in case you forgot your question.
Where did you get the idea of pairing Sherlock Holmes and Sigmund Freud?
This is a long story. Are you ready for a long story?
Yeah.
Okay. My father was a psychoanalyst, sometimes known as a shrink or a head shrinker. And when I was in school, probably about your age, people would say to me, "Oh, your old man's a shrink. Is he a Freudian?" And I didn't know. So I asked my father, I said, "Pop, are you a Freudian?" And he said, "It's a silly question." And I said, "Why? Why is it a silly question?" He said, "Because it's no more possible to discuss the history of psychoanalysis and not begin with Sigmund Freud than it is to discuss the history of the discovery of America and not start with Columbus or the Vikings or something, but to suppose that nothing has happened since Columbus is to be pretty rigid, pretty doctrinaire." So when a patient comes to see me, I listen to what they say. I listen to how they say it. I'm real interested in what they don't say. I'm interested, are they on time? What kind of outfit are they wearing? And so forth. What's their body language? I am, in short, he said, searching for clues from them as to why they're not happy. And I said, "Gee, Pop, that sounds like detective work, what you do." And he said, "Well, in a way it is like detective work." And I suddenly thought, oh, I know who Sherlock Holmes always reminded me of. My dad. And then I found, I told you it was a long story. And then I kind of wondered how much Arthur Conan Doyle, who was the author of the Sherlock Holmes stories, knew about the life and writing of Sigmund Freud. And the first thing you realize is, oh, they're both doctors. Arthur Conan Doyle was a doctor, Sigmund Freud was a doctor. And they both died in the same city, London. They both died within 9 years of each other. Doyle in 1930 and Freud in 1939. And Sherlock Holmes was a cocaine addict. And Freud had for a time been a cocaine user. And Freud got interested in cocaine with two other doctors named Königstein and Köhler on the uses of cocaine as an anesthetic during eye surgery. Arthur Conan Doyle studied ophthalmology in Vienna, where Freud was from. And this is a lot of coincidences. And I am not the sharpest knife in the drawer, so it only took me about another 15 years before I came up with the idea of Sherlock Holmes meets Sigmund Freud. But that is sort of how it came about.
That is really, really interesting.
Thank you.
In the story, Sherlock Holmes visits many locations in Europe, including London and Austria. Did you visit these locations before you wrote the novel?
I had been to London, but I had never been, until we made the movie, I'd never been to Austria, which I hate. Anyway, in Westwood, which is where UCLA is, used to have a lot of bookstores. And I would go in there and ask if I could sit in the back and take notes from their books. And they let me. And so I read a lot of books about Vienna. I read one called A Nervous Splendor, which is sitting up there somewhere, which is Vienna in 1879 by a guy named Otto Friedrich. Otto Friedrich wrote the best book about Hollywood called City of Nets, but he also wrote a really cool book about Vienna, and I looked at a lot of cookbooks to get recipes and stuff, and then more or less I just kind of made it up.
Why do you hate Vienna so much?
They're liars. They said we were Hitler's first victims, but they weren't Hitler's first victims. They were Hitler's first allies. And after the war, they lied about it. But they were the ones who really put him over the top. And I find them a very strange bunch, although back when Freud was, and there was plenty of anti-Semitism, by the way, when Freud lived there. In fact, Hitler almost killed Freud. He certainly tried. And his life was saved because he stayed in Vienna too long by a fairy princess. She was a real princess. Her name was Princess Marie Bonaparte. She was very rich because I think it was her father or her grandfather started Monte Carlo, Monaco. So she had a lot of money, and she had to pay the Nazis a lot of money to get Sigmund Freud out to London at the last year of his life. Anyway, it's put a funny taste in my mouth. Vienna, it's left it, and the taste didn't go away when I lived there when we were making the movie. It was weird. It was weird.
Wow, that is very, very intriguing. I didn't know that.
Yeah, they lied. They said, "Oh, yeah, we were all against him." No, they were all for him. They were worse than the Berliners, and the Berliners, by the way, more or less hated him. But that's another story.
Did your reveal regarding Professor Moriarty's relationship with Sherlock Holmes' mother create controversy when the book came out?
The book created a lot of controversy when it came out. I mean, the reading public shot it to the top of the bestseller list, and it stayed there for 40 weeks. It was, I think, the third best-selling novel of 1974 after Jaws and Centennial. But Sherlock Holmes fans were very upset. They weren't so much upset about the idea that Moriarty was not the Napoleon of crime. They were upset because I followed Arthur Conan Doyle in depicting Sherlock Holmes as a cocaine addict. And they've always tried to bounce around this and try to say, well, he was just sort of putting on a show for Watson. He wasn't really a cocaine addict, blah, blah. And I said, you're confusing heroes with gods. Gods may not have imperfections, but heroes always do. If a man leaps into a raging river to save a small child, we can agree that he does a heroic thing. But if the same man leaps into the same raging river to save the same small child and does it with a ball and chain attached to his leg, is he more of a hero or less? I would argue he's more of a hero if he can do it with a ball and chain. And being a cocaine addict is to have a ball and chain attached to you. So Holmes's drug addiction, to my way of thinking, didn't make him less of a hero. It made him a greater hero. And after a while, a lot of people began to see that maybe I had a kind of point. But we always seem to want our heroes to be perfect. And then when we learn, you know that expression, you have feet of clay. You ever heard that expression?
No, not before.
Oh, your idols have feet of clay. It's like you see a statue and something is really great and you look down and then you see, oh wow, it's just clay down there. It's not real. It's not perfect. And then we get angry and disappointed. But maybe we shouldn't always. Maybe you should make some allowances that human beings are human beings. And they don't come one size fits all. You know, Thomas Jefferson owned a lot of slaves.
40.
George Washington had 300. Yeah, but he didn't want to sell them because he didn't want to break up families. And he's the only founding father who actually freed his slaves in his will. He freed them. So he's not perfect. They were people of their time. And Holmes's drug addiction, to me, is like, it's not a good thing, but it doesn't make him less of a human being. And it certainly doesn't make him less of a hero.
That was an interesting analogy. I've never heard something like that before. When you create a mystery, do you know the solution before you start writing, or do you find it out along the way?
What a great question. That's one of the best questions I've ever been asked, I should say. First of all, I'm not sure that I'm a very good mystery creator. I think my artists are not the best judges of their own work, so take whatever I'm saying now with a ton of salt. But I think that the best things about the 7% Solution, the book certainly, is not the mystery. The mystery is it's okay. But I was like somebody who made a great tennis shot. I brought Freud and Holmes together, and then it was like, now what? And I'm not sure that the what was really good. So when we made the movie, I thought there were two reasons why I changed the mystery. One was I thought maybe I could do a better mystery. So I gave it a shot. The other thing I thought was, once people have read the book and they go to see the movie, they already know the answer. So maybe I could keep them awake if it was an entirely different mystery. I don't know that that's the case. I think normally when I write a mystery, somewhere early on in the planning stages of it, I get an idea of where it's going. And sometimes by then I sort of know where it's going to stop. Same thing when I write a screenplay. I want to know, what's the first shot? What am I seeing? How do I get the audience's attention? And where am I heading? And sometimes that may change if you get ideas that are cool and you hadn't thought of it before. And the nice thing about writing on a computer is it's very easy to change things. When you used to have to get scissors and Scotch tape and erase things, you weren't always so much of a perfectionist as you can now easily afford to be, because you just hit cut, paste, send, whatever. So sometimes I have a kind of a broad idea, and then sometimes I sort of get the idea along the way. It's not a very good answer, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
That was actually a really good answer.
We could cut it out. Music will fix it.
My dad tells me we are related through my great-grandfather's brother, Harold Cherniss. Did Harold have any impact on you as a storyteller?
He had the biggest impact of anyone for several reasons. One is he didn't have any children of his own. So I was kind of his little child. He was, I don't know if you know this, but he was the most famous Hellenist in the world since the Renaissance. That's not an exaggeration. That's not hyperbole. He was the second PhD in Sanskrit in the United States. He was J. Robert Oppenheimer's Sanskrit teacher. He was a pal of Einstein, Oppenheimer, Erwin Panofsky, the foremost art historian, and he was the editor of the Harvard Loeb Plutarch. He was the author of the 2-volume Aristotle Criticism of Plato in the Academy. This was a heavyweight guy, but he was very modest. He didn't think of himself in those terms, and as a little boy, listening to him telling me bedtime stories, I didn't think of him in those. I had no idea. I just listened to him tell me the stories of Odysseus and Athena and Theseus and Perseus and Medusa the Gorgon and all that stuff. And I was hooked. And the other thing he taught, and I don't think he thought of it as teaching, but he made sure that I spoke perfect English. You couldn't say like when you meant as. There's no such thing as proactive and so forth. And so those were the things that he did for me, and why I say he was perhaps my biggest influence, along with my dad, who adored him, by the way. Just thought they were very chummy.
Well, I really wish I got to meet Harold before he died.
That's the best time, because after, it's so hard to communicate. But he was, and he and I used to read. I used to go for sleepovers in Princeton. Took an hour to get there from New York, and later when I got older, we used to read Shakespeare out loud to each other. Somewhere I have a recording of him doing it, and he hated the sound of his own voice. It was a nasal Midwestern voice, but I loved it. And we would read the boys and the girls' parts. It didn't matter. It was just cool.
Did you guys ever read Macbeth?
Sure, yeah. What about you? Did you ever read it?
We're actually reading it right now. I saw the play as a field trip.
Where was that, and who was in it?
It was at a place where it's like one of those places where walk around. It's in this, and there's multiple rooms.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it was really interesting. It was the first time I ever did that.
It's Shakespeare's shortest play, Macbeth. And it's interesting because it's a play about a marriage, a real strange marriage. Yeah. But did you ever see the Japanese version? Did you ever see Throne of Blood?
No, I didn't see Throne of Blood yet.
Well, there's a famous Japanese director named Akira Kurosawa, who he used to take Western things and make them into Japanese things. So he took an Ed McBain police novel, and he made a thrilling Japanese movie called High and Low. He took Macbeth and he made it Throne of Blood. He took King Lear and he made it Ran, which is another version of Lear. And then the movies took him back. So he made this movie called The Seven Samurai, and then they made a Western called The Magnificent Seven, out of the Seven Samurai. So it went both ways.
I didn't know that.
Anyway, Macbeth is really cool. Did you enjoy that play?
I thought the play was good. My reading teacher's still making me read it after we saw the play, which is kind of annoying, but
Well,
we have to do it.
yeah, it's a total drag and you shouldn't do it. Here's the thing. Shakespeare was not meant to be read. It's meant to be seen. If you want to have a good time, Shakespeare makes wonderful movies. Go to see the Franco Zeffirelli Romeo and Juliet. See the Laurence Olivier Henry V movie. That movie changed my life and made me never read another Shakespeare play until I'd seen it first. So I could, because it's meant to be heard. It's not meant to be read. So it's like a drag. Don't do it.
Yeah, Chris. I attend.
Just go to see a movie of it.
Yeah.
There's movies of Macbeth. Orson Welles made a weird movie of Macbeth, but there's a lot. And there's Macbeth movies, and some are better than others, but you could see it. See the Orson Welles one. That's fun. Really weird. It's like Macbeth, that they live in a kind of a cave. And there are good things in, Macbeth. There's wonderful things about how people speak. For example, Macbeth has killed Duncan. He's murdered him. And the next day, those people come over for breakfast. Macduff and, they come by and they go, wow, there was a terrific storm last night. Were you there for that storm? Man, our chimneys were knocked over and everything. It was bad. And they go on and on and on about how bad it was. And all Macbeth can manage to say was, "'Twas a rough night." He could barely talk. He's so fucked up. "'Twas a rough night." Oh.
Yeah. So I attend Park Century School, which focuses on students with dyslexia. Do you know any creators that you worked with that are dyslexic, or do you have any advice
Yeah, me!
for those of us that are interested in the entertainment industry?
Yeah, dyslexia is not an object. I mean, if it were, I would be long gone. I'm dyslexic with numbers, so I can't do anything with numbers. I can't do anything that's not a story. I don't understand it. I can't read a legal document. I'm not a terrible speller, but I'm not really a great speller.
Yeah, I was dyslexic with reading comprehension, so when I read it, I couldn't remember it after I read it. So that was what it made it hard for me in school.
Oh, I was a terrible student. I didn't get good grades in anything. Now I know more than anybody. Go figure.
That was the last question that I have.
Well, go ahead.
Thank you for this time. It was really interesting to hear all your answers.
Thank you for asking. It was a pleasure.